the thing you mentioned of the choiceless awareness, to me, this seems kind of synonymous with the kind of observer self, or this kind of transcendent self, in the sense, or at least related, or maybe a practice that would allow you to access this. So for me, before I even kind of, I guess, read up about meditation, I was practicing effectively this, so kind of dropping into kind of choiceless awareness, which I see as a very profound state to be in. I see it as the kind of the clear seeing of the way your mind genuinely is. So there's consciousness and things arising in it, and it's ultimately kind of peaceful, and you don't have to identify with any of the contents. But then the expanding awareness thing you mentioned as well is also how I intuitively trained myself when my mind was not kind of, when it wasn't easy to drop into choiceless awareness. I feel like, and your mind is busy, spending 5 minutes focusing on the breath and then on the body is a wonderful way, and this kind of expanding awareness is a great way to access the same state. And I think a lot of what I talk about here comes from these traditions, perhaps, that are slightly different to the kind of the mindfulness tradition that's taught in the West. Seems to come out of this kind of Theravada school of Buddhism, right? There's a more kind of gradual approach towards, if you're thinking in terms of enlightenment and seeing the nature of the mind, it's this gradual cultivation. But I talk a lot about these more kind of radical approaches. There's Advaita Vedanta in kind of Hinduism and Zen, and in Tibetan Buddhism, this idea of like you see it, you have a direct kind of awakening, and then you might return to and kind of cultivate the practice afterwards. Do you see the way you teach mindfulness? I really like, because it seems to be, I think the beauty of mindfulness is it can both be just a very practical, down to earth tool for kind of getting more awareness, getting more control of your emotions, but it's also the perfect kind of launching pad for these really profound insights. Do you see it as having both of those kind of aspects?
Yeah, exactly. I find this really fascinating. In fact, the philosophy that I first joined, when I was age 20, this practical philosophy, it was all based on Advaita Vedanta, but it was based on the Advaita Vedanta idea as taking lifetimes and lifetimes rather than an immediate insight. So,
Okay.
I don't know if your listeners know about Advaita. Is it something that they're familiar with?
It's worth unpacking, yeah.
Yeah. So, the Advaita meaning not two, so non-duality. And Advaita Vedanta comes from the Hindu tradition, I guess, and it's the most ancient part of it. And some would argue it underlies all the other philosophies and religious beliefs of Hinduism, that everything is one. So yeah, the way I learned it in this philosophy class was that you do this meditation and you do these mindful exercises and you keep practicing, and you may not get it this lifetime, but you keep going, and one day you'll get it. And the mistake I made, I think for like 10 years or something, was that I made that into the goal. So, how I spoke about how I was very much into goals and, whether it was money or relationships, it's going to make me happy in the future. I thought, it's about enlightenment. Enlightenment is the goal for me. And that's what I need to get. And so my determination in my practice, and this is what they encourage as well, is, keep practicing, trying really hard. And what the problem is, and with what you've described as well in the 10-day silent course that you did as well, is that you do get these glimpses of amazing sense of connection and a sense of oneness, and it almost becomes like a drug that you want to try and get to all the time. And that's what I found. I had a spiritual experience, or a few spiritual experiences, and there was just this constant desire to try and get to that state, and that is enlightenment, or that is oneness, and I'm not there right now. And I think I must have tried it for a few years, and then I just gave up, as if it's an impossible thing for me to achieve. And then discovering mindfulness, but just practicing it from the perspective of the health benefits, and finding it, my life feels a bit more comfortable. But in the last few months, I've had this insight, and going back to the non-duality stuff, that it's not like some people are enlightened and some people are not. It's like everyone's there. Everyone is already oneness. Everyone is already consciousness. And yes, we may have the motivation to practice mindfulness, to cultivate more sense of presence, to get more of this sense of being the container, and some of the experiences you shared. But it's not so much like a goal that we need to strive for at all. is this sense of gradually or instantaneously dropping the idea that even free will is there and it's all unfolding perfectly just as it is. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely how I aligns with my thinking about it. The traditions that kind of, I guess, I find most resonance with tends to be the kind of what's called the Mahayana, right, school of Buddhism, which is the kind of northern, like Tibetan Buddhism and Zen, where there's this concept of Buddha nature, which is that, exactly as you say, we're already enlightened. Basically, everyone's mind already has this character, but it's kind of obscured by our habitual patterns of thought. And I think the great thing about that is, sure, you can have experiences where you have moments of kind of a taste of enlightenment or long periods of inhabiting that state, and there's some kind of insight which can feel very, you know, incentivizing, and it's a trap in its own way. As you say, it makes you kind of want more of those states.
Definitely.
So I think, for me, I think that once you've had one of those experiences, the best thing to do is if you've understood what it means, is to return to a simple mindfulness practice. So if you're inhaling and in that moment you are fully absorbed in the sensation of inhaling, that is a moment of pure, like, perfect awareness. That is the same thing as the thing you experienced in the most dramatic moment of feeling yourself to blink out of existence. It really is about just being fully coincident with whatever's arising. And so I think there's the insight can be really helpful to get people. I mean, you know, in the first place, get people interested in this stuff. It can be really powerful. But in a sense, it's almost like the egoic part of the mind wants to get the insight so it can tell the story and say, I had the insight and now I'm done. So that's why I think, even though I talk about these traditions that have put less focus on cultivation of something like mindfulness, I actually think formal meditation practice is crucial. And if you're not doing it because you think you've had the insight, that's another trick the ego is playing to get you to to kind of just live your life in your habitual way instead of cultivating this way of being, I think.
Interesting. So for you, is there a certain state of mind that people do get to that is enlightenment and some people don't?
I would say, so the way I think about it is that consciousness has the characteristic you seem to notice on the first time you tried this, which is it's there in the spaces between the sensations, and it's really as simple as the lights are on and things are happening in consciousness. And if that's all you say and that's all you feel to be true, that is enlightenment as far as I can see. There's nothing magical about it, nothing supernatural, but it's just, this is the simplest aspect of our nature. And then as these evolved creatures, all this other noise comes in of kind of, oh, I better go and eat food because then I'll survive. And all this mental chatter gets in the way. So we don't notice just how simple it is just to exist. And the fact that for the moments where you do that, all suffering is gone. So I don't hold that kind of enlightenment is some state that's, higher than our usual everyday consciousness, or some exists in some, supernatural way, but it's really unveiling. I mean, this is why it's, described as waking up, right? The Buddha is the one who woke up, because we're living in some kind of deluded dream when we're in those moments when we're hijacked by the anger and we're feeling angry and we think the anger has to exist and it's real and it's justified. That's a moment of delusion. And when you let go of that and there's just the sensation, that's it. Like, to me, there's not more than that recognition. Well, it doesn't even have to be recognition, just being that way, which I think is why mindfulness is the ultimate wisdom, really is about cultivating this. And we spoke about formal practice, but there's also the sense of informal practice, which I think is a real powerful aspect of mindfulness, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think part of the big attraction for mindfulness is the informal practice. So most people find doing the meditation really hard. Unfortunately, they classify meditation as just clearing your mind, and they try it a few times, they can't do it, and they give up. But they also discover that mindfulness is also about being in the here and now. So it's about cultivating mindfulness. As you're listening to this podcast, your mind would go off and think about something else. And you're like, no, I've decided to listen to this podcast, so let me bring my attention gently and kindly back to it. And whatever else that you're doing, whether you're typing an email or going for a walk or having a conversation and practicing listening to someone, which is really hard at the moment because we're so distracted these days, to make a gentle effort to bring your attention back to whatever you're doing. So you're just doing that thing in itself. That's what the informal practice is. And the formal and informal together, they work so beautifully. So as you practice more formal mindful meditations, you're more likely to be present in your everyday life. And the more present you are in your everyday life, you're more likely to be able to be present in your meditations. So they work together really beautifully.